typically pretty safe to say that the majority of really big cities in the world tend to be pretty international, which means that you can travel to those places and not necessarily speak the language of the country where you're visiting. However, moving to a new city is completely different, and while Paris is definitely an international city and you do not need to speak French in order to take a trip to Paris and enjoy Paris, moving here is, yeah, it's a little bit different. I have lived here for how long? Almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in the fall. And I do speak French now, but when I first moved to Paris, my French was not fluent. So I definitely did know some French. I could communicate in basic forms, but I was not very comfortable and I wasn't used to using it with native speakers. I was very much in the study French type of mode. So I have a little bit of a comparison of what it's like to be in Paris with a limited French ability. And then I do have the comparison now to being able to speak French fluently. Not perfectly, not bilingually, but fluently. So because of this, and because I talk about this so much on my channel, I actually do get the question quite, not frequently, but every so often someone will ask me, do you need French in order to not just visit Paris, but live in Paris? Short answer, spoiler, yes, I do think you need French, but this is a little more complicated than just a short answer because you can technically survive in Paris without knowing French. It's just a lot harder. So I have compiled a list. I thought it would be fun. Instead of just saying, yes, you need French in order to live in Paris, I compiled a list of the few little things that you don't really think about where French has really saved my life living here in Paris. The first thing where I really started to notice a French ability helped me out was with admin. So of course, you know, let's just get this stereotype out of the way. French admin is something else. Every country has their own silly bureaucracy, and every country has those hoops you have to jump through, not just because of bureaucracy, but because that's just, you just gotta do it. Especially if you're not an EU citizen, the paperwork is going to be so much, and it's gonna start before you even move to the country because you have to get a visa in order to move to the country. For the stuff that has to do directly with the immigration office, there are translators available for a lot of different languages. I personally did not ever use one because my French was good enough to where it was easier for me to struggle my way through in French than it was to have to get a translator involved, because that does get quite complicated. And if there's anything that you have to do on your part that you would need a translator for, you probably have to hire a translator. There's also stuff like your insurance and social security. Once you get here, you have to do healthcare somehow. There's stuff like your phone and internet, you know, basically everything. There's just so much admin that's involved with moving to a different country, moving in general, and especially, of course, when you have to deal with immigration and visas and stuff like that. There's just gonna be a lot of paperwork. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I did everything by myself because I do have a husband who is French and he did help me out with a lot of stuff. Whenever he was able to help me out, he did. But there's just a lot of stuff that you personally have to take care of. Even if you have a friend or a significant other or a translator there to help you, there's gonna be stuff like showing up for your appointments, and there's gonna be paperwork or phone calls that you have to make that have to be made by you as the citizen. You can't have somebody else make those for you. So there's a lot of stuff you have to manage yourself, and all of this stuff is going to be by default in French. I mean, it's logical. You're in a French-speaking country, it's probably gonna be in French. So even when people do speak a little bit of English or even speak English very well, the default is always gonna be French. And when it comes to legality, often it has to be in French. Especially when I first moved to France, I have had some very awkward and difficult phone calls and like doctor's appointments and things like that that were just quite difficult to do, but I did them. And now that I speak French even better, obviously some things like doctor's appointments are still gonna be a bit of a challenge because it's terminology you don't necessarily use, but I have noticed how much easier it's gotten. I've noticed how much faster I can accomplish these things, how much easier it is for both me and the other person. The better your French is and the more confident you can be in your French, then the less confusing those situations will be for them, for you, for everyone involved. Another way that knowing French has really helped me out is in apartment hunting. So Paris is notorious for being a terrible place to find an apartment. And it's true, it's 100% true. I actually did a video with a couple of my friends here, Cheryl and Jay, just talking about apartment hunting and how freaking horrible it is. And it is horrible. So already coming into this process, even as a native French speaker who has lived in France or even Paris all of your life, even if you have the cards lined up for you in the best way possible, it's really bad. It's really hard. If you then add the huge hindrance on top of not being able to communicate with the landlords and the agencies, it becomes nearly impossible. I'm not gonna say impossible, I don't wanna be that much of a downer because I know it's definitely possible, and there are landlords and agencies who will be able to speak English or whatever your native language is. I actually had a German friend who lived here for a while who ended up finding a German landlord, so she spoke German with her landlord. It does happen, it definitely does happen, but it's just really stacking the odds against yourself if you don't speak French. That even goes if you have a French partner. Like in my case, I still did have to speak with the agencies and the landlords of the places we visited, and I still do have to sign the contract. I have to be able to understand the contract. So there's a lot of elements that, regardless of your situation or who you have to help you out, you're still gonna have to be able to take on that responsibility, at least in part, by yourself. Even more than just sort of checking the boxes of being able to, you know, sign the documents and stuff like that, a huge part of being able to get an apartment when there are so many people wanting the same apartments is being able to make an impression. I personally know that my husband and I got this apartment because we were really friendly and really open and chatted for a long time with the person, to where we actually had a connection and the person actually liked us and thought we would be great in this apartment. So that's why we got picked. Another way you can really see the benefits of knowing French when you live in Paris is if you are job hunting in Paris. There are tons of international jobs here, so jobs that require English or Spanish or Mandarin or just tons of different languages. So it's safe to say that there are jobs that are not going to require French as the main language. That being said, a lot of them are still going to want you to be able to speak French. It might be a job that requires a certain percentage of work in French, or it might be a job that's basically 100% your responsibilities in your native language, but you still need French to be able to communicate. So you might have colleagues, the entire office might be French, or your boss might be French, so you might have to have all your meetings with your boss in French, even if you work in English or Spanish or Mandarin or whatever other language you're working in. There are just lots of scenarios where French is still extremely valuable when you're living in a French-speaking country and working in a French office. This has definitely been the case for me. My first job, for example, I worked entirely in English. Everything that I was basically responsible for producing, the content I was producing, so articles and social media content, that was all in English. But my colleagues from all the other teams, it was international, so there were native German speakers, native Spanish speakers. Our vehicular language was French because that was the language of the office, and our bosses were French, so all of our meetings, all of our team meetings with different teams, all of that was French. One other thing that I've noticed has gotten so much easier since I first moved to France is riding the metro. I've done this pretty much every single day since I moved to Paris, so it's safe to say I know the metro pretty well, or at least certain lines in certain places. And it is definitely possible, of course, as a tourist, as a temporary traveler, if you're just passing through, it's definitely possible to ride the metro and to make do with the English that's available to you. But especially when I first visited Paris, so when I first visited, it's been almost 5 years now, and I didn't speak a word of French. And that's when you really notice when a city has not translated much of their stuff, when you don't speak a word of the language of the place where you are. Since then, I have been painfully aware of how very little the metro actually translates things. If you're on one of the main sort of touristy lines, then they will often translate the messages, the pre-recorded messages, but any new messages that happen, if something unexpected happens, you have to get off and, you know, get on a different train or move to a different platform, that's almost always gonna be just in French. I think there's only one circumstance when I've heard an announcement be translated, and it's one that happens quite frequently because it's when strikes happen, and it's the train that takes you to the Charles de Gaulle airport. And when you have to change platforms for that one, they do translate it in English. I think it's only French and English. But otherwise, anything that is announced either by the train driver or it's announced in the station, anything like that, it's almost always gonna be only French. And when they announce things on the signs, when it's typed up, it's always in French only. If you go to the Twitter accounts for the different lines, which yes do exist, if you go there, it's 100% in French. All of these things are very easy to absorb quickly if you do speak French, even a little bit of French. But when you're struggling and when you don't speak anything, then there will be moments definitely on the metro when you will feel it. I remember on that first trip to Paris, almost 5 years ago, there was a moment when the metro, they made everyone get off and get on the next train. I have no idea why. And it was just an announcement by a metro driver. And yes, of course, I gotta get this in here because someone in the comments is gonna point it out. Nobody really can understand the metro announcements when it's kind of like the by the driver. No one understands that pretty much, even native French speakers. But you do have a chance if you speak French, and there are often announcements that are a little bit better than that are a little bit clearer. Because in this case, this particular announcement, everybody pretty much on the train understood it, except for the group of people I was with, none of which really spoke French that well. One person did a little bit of French, didn't really help us in that situation. There actually was a nice French guy guy standing next to us as well who heard us in English saying, "What's going on? We don't know what's going on." And he translated for us. So that was okay, and that does happen, but you're sort of relying on the niceness of the people around you. It's not a huge deal if you're just visiting for a few days or a few weeks, but when you live here and when you start taking the metro every single day, I guarantee you're gonna end up in a situation where there's not someone around who'll help you out when you're on a line that's not being translated because it's not a popular line for tourists. There's gonna be that situation and you're gonna find yourself a little bit lost if you don't speak French. So it has definitely saved my butt multiple times. Knowing French has also made it a lot easier for me to make friends in Paris. Firstly, let's get the elephant out of the room. I have a ton of expat friends here, and there's actually a huge community basically of non-French people who live in Paris, and it's amazing. I love that group of friends. It's probably my strongest group of friends. That being said, I do have French friends and a lot of those expat friends that I have also speak French, also have French friends, so there's just a lot of sort of friend groups and communities. You'll end up in a lot of different social situations where French will really help you out and is really important. Plenty of French people speak other languages, of course, especially English, and especially if they live in Paris. So it's 100% possible to make friends, French or otherwise, when you're living in Paris. But at the end of the day, you are in France, and so it's kind of logical that it's easier to make those connections, especially with French people, when you can speak their language. You can also start participating in things, like, for example, I have never yet gone to the French theater, but I have been invited a few times, and I was a little bit too shy. I just said no, and usually I did have conflicts because it's kind of difficult with my calendar anyway. But I just sort of sneaked out of those situations because I'm not really sure, you know, I wasn't sure that I would understand French theater, but I'm thinking about going to my first French play at some point because I think I can finally handle it. And I'm starting to really get involved with different events, different things going on here in the city. And that actually leads me into my next point. The last way that I'm going to talk about in this video that French has really helped me out is being able to just enjoy Paris as a local. All the really big, famous, touristy stuff, there's gonna be translations. There's gonna be ways of enjoying those things without knowing French. But when you actually live in a city, you wanna get a little bit more out of it. You wanna start going to the places where only locals go. You wanna start going to the restaurants and to the events and just to the areas in general, just enjoying, whoa. I have my paper in my lap here. I'm getting a little bit crazy with my hands here, but my tea hasn't spilled yet, so just saying. Anyway though, as I was saying, there are definitely just a lot of aspects about Paris and about any city in general that you're not able to fully appreciate if you're not able to fully immerse yourself in that place and in the culture. Part of unlocking that is, of course, just being here for a while and having the ability to start accessing those things. I mean, any city you move to, regardless of the language, there's gonna be things that you discover the longer you're here. But a lot of those things in Paris, I've found definitely become in French. So you start with the things that are very international, very touristy. Those are the really cool things. The Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, the Latin Quarter, all of these things. And then you start branching out, and then you start branching out a bit more, and then a little bit more. And the further out you get from the touristy stuff, the more you start realizing a lot of locals, this is Paris to them. This is 100% Paris, and it's all in French. So yeah. There's the long version of my short answer, yes. I'm gonna stop there, even though I probably could continue this for a while. I feel like I've been talking for a very long time, so I'm already worried about how long this video is gonna end up being. Please do continue the conversation in the comments. I would love to know your thoughts on what I've said. If you have anything else to add to this list, if you have any stories to tell of how knowing another language has helped you, whatever you wanna add to continue this conversation. I really love talking about this sort of thing. I can't talk anymore, but I do love talking about it when I haven't talked about it for ages like I've just done. It's getting really hot in here though. I'm basically baking alive. So I think I need to bring the fan in from the other room, bring it in here and just like sit in front of it for a while. So I'm gonna go do that. And on that note, I hope you guys are staying cool. I hope you're enjoying the summer, and I will talk to you soon in another video.